which I just think it's interesting to think about that, about what it is, how you work in curating an exhibition in terms of the space that you're talking about.
Yes. So, spot on that one, Flick. That's the first thing. And the second thing, I'm just going to grab something, is that the Hayward produce these amazing education packs, which apparently to this day, I mean, the show was done in 1997. To this day, people still send me emails and use.
Yeah.
So the question for me was that the success of that project had to do with the idea that somehow the Hayward were managing to bring together outside architects to help kind of navigate the space. I didn't understand which they did at the show, but also at that point of time, 97, I mean, the Hayward had, as you know, one of the interesting and most kind of really thought-provoking gallery education, but just a kind of a knock-on to the show, but actually were integral to the concept of the show. Even when we were deciding the objects, we had to...
I feel like sort of saying, say it, David.
The reason I'm talking about that show is because, again, I feel it's one of the only shows I've worked on where I've worked very closely with architects and also with an education department.
Can I say something here? And this completely taking it away from Fanon, but something I've been working on recently, and making the link with what you've just said, which is that when I arrived, so we've already established, Ala and I, that she thinks of me entirely as gallery education, although, of course, I only worked in these two different places, the Tate and the Hayward, altogether for 10 years, and I've been working for 40 years. Nevertheless, this is the discussion we're having. But what's interesting for me about it is that in 1999, when I went to work at the Hayward, somebody called Helen Luckett was already working there. She will have been involved maybe in producing... Oh no, she won't have done that one, the Harlem Renaissance one probably. But she had been working first at the Arts Council and then at the Hayward, when the Arts Council collection got incorporated into and run by the Hayward. She'd been working there since the late 70s. Okay, so for 20 years. I mention this in the context of a neoliberal change management culture that we now have, where it's very rare for anybody to stay 20 years working in somewhere. But she'd been working there all that time. In the 1970s, I didn't know this at the time, but I have just been doing some oral history research with her, because I did vaguely know that she had curated a show in the early 1970s, which completely backs up the argument that I made about gallery education coming out of sort of radical curatorial practices and so on. She had done a show she'd done a series of shows at Southampton City Art Gallery where she was curating with children. Now, in those days, if you can remember Mary Kelly's work with Postpartum Document shown in 1978, it was absolutely slammed because it dared to even picture children, picture the concept of maternity and so on. The response to it was entirely negative. So to do work where you're actually bringing children in to produce something was completely radical. But because it was with children, and also because she is not a self-branding, self-promoting curator, that work has been lost until now. I am presenting it at this moment.
Also, to go back to the point on architects, like bringing architects to design exhibitions, basically, or to help in to help in organizing archival material within exhibition contexts. I think I'm always thinking of this a visitor experience. Probably because I was trained as an architect as well, where aesthetics do not serve if they are not functional as well. I mean, spaces, if they are not really functional, their aesthetic side is not really important. So anyways, this is something most of the time we're very conscious of. We're especially in very heavily like in very heavy, like archived exhibitions, you tend to lose people's attention, and you have to kind of like, I don't know, somehow find a way to, if they don't like look at the image, at the drawings, they look at the sculptures, and if they don't look at the sculptures, they look at the video, and if they don't look at the video, they look at them. You know, they have to stay somehow in the exhibition a bit longer than their, you know, patience span. Or yeah, I was like, how, like for instance, if they would stay normally 30 seconds in front of a video, there must be some sort of another attraction that let them stand there for a bit longer and just give the work or the exhibition or part of the exhibition a chance. And for sake of work, for sake of time, I think how I think we have to
wrap. Yeah, but can I respond before
Sure.
you respond? One of the interesting things I felt, and this is no way taken away from your project, is that would you prefer your project to be in the architectural Biennale or in the actual visual art Biennale? The reason I say that is because one of the things I was really fascinated when I was walking through the Arsenal, particularly looking at your piece, was that the context of the Venice Biennale, the visual art Biennale, is that you're wandering into a space which actually is kind of fabricated for that moment in time. Whilst you're wandering in that fabricated space, you're looking at your work, which actually is another fabrication of a particular moment in time. So, and I just thought, I love the way in which, I don't know if it was deliberate, how I felt there was a nuanced play on those two things, and I just thought, would you felt that would have been a better play on if it would have been in the architectural Biennale than actually in the visual art Biennale?
I like that it's in the art Biennale, in fact. I mean, it can work in the architecture Biennale, that's what Okwi also said. But at the same time, I think there's a little bit of more, like there's a strength for it, like to be shown in the art context rather than in the architecture context, where for many reasons, it's mainly because also many of the things that were happening, like there were like all these hidden lines or hidden factors that kind of link all the works together that are merely and mostly based on either artists doing things or architects thinking they're artists doing things, or even rulers thinking they're artists doing things, you know. And it's all, but it's not just that, it's all coming from this also extended space of looking at history and art and architecture and narratives, and just trying to pull them all together, mix them all together in a presentation, which might be more fitting for an art exhibition than an architecture exhibition per se. Finally, just to close on this note, basically, if there was like more, I mean, I think also of exploring this project in terms of its internal architecture, you know, the space within the gymnasium itself, and in this case, this might be in another, this could be possibly in an architecture biennial, where also like we kind of extend up the exteriority of a building and just like try to see it somehow from what was happening inside.